Okay. Do we know, is Steve back up? Has Steve turned on yet? I can't see. Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everyone. So glad to see you on this Tuesday evening as we welcome Jaime Puente. I'm Deb Huey and Chair of Church and Society, and this is, Jaime is our next speaker up in our speaker series, so I'm very glad to see you here. Jaime is the Director of Economic Opportunity for Every Texan, which is a nonprofit organization started 35 years ago by the Benedictine Sisters of Boerne. It's in Austin, and they believe that social justice requires public policy, and they push for quality health care, education, and jobs so that every Texan has a fair opportunity to thrive. In his role with Every Texan, Jamie brings deep expertise in advocacy and public policy with a focus on researching and writing immigration policy to support building equity and dismantling systemic barriers for marginalized communities across Texas. He grew up in Houston, Texas, and holds a Master of Arts in Mexican and American Studies from Hook 'em Horns, the University of Texas in Austin. I met Jaime, it was probably in the winter, early spring, pouring rain, and Jaime was one of our coaches as we were preparing to visit with our senator and with representatives on some of the upcoming legislation that was coming forward on immigration. And as people asked questions of Jaime, how do we address this? Jaime gave us a master class in just civic dialogue. Just every response was full of grace and compassion. And I asked him, I said, well, Jaime, can we just record you and then take you in and play you for our senator? But he assured us we would do okay. And anyway, in Church and Society, as we began to look at a focus on immigration, we knew we wanted to host a speaker series, Speaker for Immigration, and the first face that popped up for me was Jaime. I reached out, and this is months later, so I reached out to him. He was gracious to respond almost immediately and agreed to come to Denton and share space here with us this evening. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jaime Puente.
Thank you all so much for inviting me here to your home. I was raised in the Catholic tradition, but it's always an honor to share space in a holy space like this, especially when it's about a topic as important as this. And so, tonight I'm going to talk about migration justice in Texas, because, we at Every Texan, as Deb said, we were founded by a group of ladies that I like to call some radical sisters from the Benedictine order out of Boerne, Texas. And they have been working for longer than Every Texan has been around. They have been serving their community, beginning in San Antonio, as early as the 1950s. And then in the 1970s, they were operating a hospital. And then by the 1980s, they realized that, we need to do more than just treat the symptoms. We need to do more than just provide the care for people who are suffering from ailments. Yes, they're medical ailments, but really what they are social ailments, right? They're suffering from poverty. They're suffering from a lack of education, because we know a lack of education very often means that you are more prone to health issues and sickness, right? And so they took it upon themselves to create the Benedictine Center, which then became the Center for Public Policy Priorities, which is now every Texan whom I am honored and privileged to work for. And so, as Deb said, again, we believe that social justice requires public policy because we believe in a Texas that offers everyone the chance to compete and succeed in life. We envision a Texas where everyone is healthy, well-educated, and financially secure. And so, what we talk about is we talk about leading with values. And what that means is responding in action. And so, really at every Texan, one of the things that we have been doing in recent years is fighting against anti-democratic power, right, in various forms. And some of the ways we do that, right, is we stand on our values. We are clear about what we believe and why we believe it. We identify and articulate the problem, usually in some form of public policy, a law change or an administrative rule change. We propose that solution, and then we call for mobilization. We ask people to reach out to their legislators, and then we directly ask for legislators to make those changes. And so, we come to it from a place of values, but not only values, data-driven values, right? And so, while our faith can inform our values, public policy should be driven by a commitment to seeking truth, objective facts, and data to eliminate suffering and make everyone's life easier. Every Texan and our partners make that data available to people. That's our primary role, is to make data and analysis available both to our partners in the advocacy space, but also legislators and with you as well, right, our fellow Texans. And so what are we going to talk about tonight? Right? We're going to talk about nation building, right? I come from a history background. My master's degree is in Mexican American Studies, and one thing historians like to talk about, especially in terms of immigration, is its role in building what we think of as the United States, right? And so, what we like to think about at every Texan is a nation building that's founded and fostered in justice, right? Because it's a product of migrant justice. Because migration has powered American social and economic growth since our founding, right? For most of our history, people migrated to the United States without any rules, without any laws, right? Without any barriers. Only some of them, however, had access to become a full citizen, right? To be fully embraced by our government as, fully voting members of society. And so for most of that history, right, since 1790, this might be a little small. I'm happy to share the slides later, but this is just a quick timeline of major moments in U.S. immigration policy, starting with the 1790 Naturalization Act, the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which if you follow the news, you may have heard of in the last couple months. And then, one of the big ones, right, that people don't really think of as an immigration policy, but the 14th Amendment, right, that grants birthright citizenship to anyone born in the United States. Major piece of policy that came out of the Civil War, right, in reaction to slavery, which now benefits anyone, right, who is born here and has been born here since that time. And then you go through, and there are another list, the 1880s, the Chinese Exclusion Acts, right, which prohibited people from Asian countries access to the United States, and in some cases, they were subject to deportation regimes as well. And then going forward, the big one, the really big one, right, is the 1924 Immigration and Nationality Act. That establishes the Border Patrol as we know it now. That is one of the big pieces of legislation that was created to police immigration in the ways that we now know it. And so that's where U.S. Border Patrol came from. And then going forward, the McCarran-Walter Act, that established quotas that said only so many people from Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, Africa, were allowed in at any given year. Going forward to the 1965, my favorite president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he signed the Hart-Celler Act, which replaced the quotas program with a system that is based on family units, right? So before, it really didn't matter if you had a family unit or if you had a mother or father, brother or sister, right? Now, after 1965, that's how our immigration policy decisions were often made. It's like, do you have someone in your family who is already here? It's what they call chain migration, right? Like one person moves here, and then they help their other family members come as well, right? And that really launched with the 1965 McCarran-Walter Act. Fast forward to 1986, which is the last big moment, the last big time that the United States Congress really did something to address people living here without documentation, right? And that's IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. Since 1986, nothing has been done to address people who have tried to migrate to the United States outside of the formal legal process. And so in 1996, President Clinton, with the IRA, right? It's an interesting acronym. That was focused on enforcement, right? And that really begins this moment that brings us to now, where we are talking about enforcement-based issues and enforcement and policing-based policy decisions to what I see, and I think what many see, is a human question, right? Who is coming to our doorstep and asking for refuge, asking for asylum, asking for us to open the door and be welcoming, right? Instead of treating policy issues with that lens, we've chosen a lens of punitive, militarized enforcement. And so we're here again, right? Nation building in times of change. I mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Acts of 1880s. Those acts of the 1880s, like exclusionary policies now, occurred in a moment of rapid change, both economically and socially, right? What was happening in the 1880s? We just built the Transcontinental Railroad, right? We were on the cusp of the 20th century when we were getting electricity. It was like a big moment of transformational historical change. And we had thousands and thousands of people, whether they were people of Chinese descent, Indian descent, from all over Asia and Southeast Asia here, helping us build the wealth that we rely on now still, right? We still rely on the railroads that immigrants from the 1880s died for in some cases. And so the last quarter of the 19th century saw the nation contend with a large influx of people, financial uncertainty, and changing power dynamics. Here in 2025, we are again confronted by a moment of change that impacts migration and the well-being of those who choose to make a new home in a foreign place. And what are we seeing? Very often we're seeing fear-driven policy. And that fear-driven policy betrays the data. Responsible migration policy that is rooted in data, not fear, ensures justice, equity, and opportunity for every Texan and every American. History shows that immigrants are not a danger to our democracy or to blame for what may be missing from American lives. In fact, the fringe benefits available in the United States today are largely possible because of immigrant labor, ingenuity, and grit. But too often, U.S. immigration policy is driven by fear, not data. So let's talk about some data, right? Who are our migrant friends, families, and neighbors, right? Who are they, right? They are our friends, families, and neighbors. Sometimes they're our students. Many times they're our students. One thing I don't have here is that 1 in 3 Texas children live in a mixed status family. So that means that 1 in 3 Texas children lives in a home with someone whose immigration status is at best questionable. But this is about economic data. So immigrants are 17% of the Texas population, but account for 22% of state economic productivity. In 2022, undocumented Texans paid $4.9 billion in state and local taxes. That's public schools, that's hospitals, right? Those are the things where we see the services where we might see them, quote unquote, taking. And nationally, immigrants make up 14% of the population, but 18% of the labor force. Nearly 2 million Texans are undocumented as of 2022. And what's happening? They're being targeted instead of being celebrated, right? Of the 2 million undocumented immigrants in Texas, more than 225,000 are entrepreneurs. Undocumented households have a combined $48.8 billion in spending power. Undocumented Texans paid more than $8 billion in federal taxes without receiving any services in return, right? So how does that happen, right? There's this thing called the I-10 number. If you are undocumented, you can file with the IRS to get an I-10 number. I forgot the acronym, my apologies. But it allows you to basically pay taxes. You can use that number to file a tax return and pay the government. It's what it's asking for, basically, what we all have to pay into the government. But unfortunately, and because of our laws, right, rightfully so in some cases, undocumented people paying those taxes don't get access to Social Security, they don't get access to Medicare, they don't get access to those federal services that our federal income taxes pay for. So very often, right, especially in the last decade or so, the billions of dollars that undocumented immigrants pay into Medicaid and Social Security, very often that subsidizes the lack of financial stability that we're seeing in Social Security. So without that $8 billion that undocumented immigrants are paying into the system, our Social Security and Medicare system may not be as fiscally sound as it has been. And so let's think about some more ways, right, where they could be celebrated, but instead they're being targeted. More than 46% of the Fortune 500 companies in 2023, 231 out of the 500, were founded by immigrants or their children. And this is not undocumented immigrants, this is immigrants in general, right? But those companies generate $8.6 trillion in revenue. If compared with national GPDs, that rank is the third largest economy globally, right? This is a massive amount of money. 15.4 million people worldwide are employed by these companies. That would be the 5th largest US state. So what about these anti-immigrant policies? They exploit the crisis they create. They really do. So that list, right, I started this by saying, for much of our history as a nation, people could migrate to the United States without question, for the most part. It was only until the mid to late 1800s when we started enforcing borders and creating borders, and more so in the late 1920s, and even more so in the last 25 to 30 years. And so for 150 years, policy choices and man-made borders created the category of people we now refer to as undocumented immigrants or illegal aliens. We created those people. We labeled them that because we created policies as Americans that designated them as being outside of our community. In fact, these were people carrying out the human condition of migration, right? Seeking work, safety, and refuge. Unlike historic migration, the last decade's migration occurred across the globe at a time of heightened access to technology that made compelling news and viral videos possible. And so what did we see? After decades of spending, creating the punitive enforcement, militarized-based response to immigration policy, we see increased and ineffective enforcement. Since 2000, the U.S. Border Patrol budget alone, just the U.S. Border Patrol budget alone, has grown from $1 billion to $7.8 billion. It is the largest police force in our federal government. Total border security spending in this most recent financial package passed by Congress ballooned to $170 billion, more than we spent on the Women, Infant, and Children program, housing assistance, and child care grants in 2024. Just think about that. We're choosing to make it harder for women, infants, and children to eat, to get the nutrition so that we can fund this particular policy. And so what's happening now, right? How does that hurt? How does that hurt Americans? These policy solutions propose relief, not harm, right? Like we want some relief, but not harm. But so here we see that the escalation in deportations that we've witnessed recently, it could destroy up to 6 million jobs, American jobs, right? Like people who are not immigrants, U.S.-born jobs. And so you'll see that, the more immigrants that we lose out of our economy, the more U.S.-born people are going to lose their job. Because as we saw earlier, right, immigrants create a lot of jobs in our economy. So let's ask, right? Let's ask. In 2025, can American policymakers provide a dignified pathway for migrating people seeking refuge when they fail to recognize their economic contributions, right? How do we move forward? Well, one of the things that I like to say, and I like to remind folks when I walk into offices in the Capitol, is that we welcome the stranger in Texas. It is a shared value. It is a shared value to welcome the stranger, both in Texas and across the United States. It is one of our core values as Americans. Because as Americans and Texans, we take pride in the hospitality we provide and the space we make at our table. We know that means more than simply opening the door to the stranger. It means providing shelter and support when necessary. And so let's recognize the dignity of everyone, of all. If a faith system is what guides policymakers, faith leaders have spoken and made that guidance available. Weeks before he died, Pope Francis, again I mentioned I was raised Catholic. Weeks before he died, Pope Francis reminded us, the Son of God in becoming man also chose to live the drama of immigration. The Holy Family were migrants. Public policy should promise shared dignity, right? We should think about that. If our public policy is going to be driven by faith and values, shouldn't it also promise shared dignity? Public policies that deny dignity to migrants, especially those that are intentionally cruel and destructive to families and children, also deny Americans our own dignity and force complicity. So what do we do? What do we do? We take action. We resist and respond because, and I found this, thankfully, through the Church and Society webpage, resist harmful policy proposals and offer radical hospitality. That's what we try to share at Every Texan, is that we as a state have an abundance that can be shared, and if there's not a seat at the table, we have the means to create a longer table and to provide more resources at that table. We have those resources. It's a matter of whether or not we choose to make them available to this stranger among us. So how do we do that again, right? So we're going to take action, we're going to resist and respond, but we're going to do it with reliable facts and data. We're going to follow and support local immigrant rights organizations. The Workers' Defense Project here in North Texas is a great source of information. We're going to pay attention and speak up for the faithful by contacting our local, state, and federal elected officials. It's our job to make them known that as voters, they respond to us, and we are acting on our faith and our values and our belief system as Americans and as Texans, and they have a duty to respond to us too. And then we can also bear witness by writing letters to the editor, social media or one-on-one conversations with your community, right? Like this is going to be on all of us to really say and to really push back on some of the most divisive and dangerous ways that we are seeing people try to divide us, using fear of the stranger, fear of immigrants among us to divide us, not even from our immigrant friends and family, but from each other as Americans, right? Like that is being used as a wedge to divide us right now, and we have to be clear and forceful with the fact that we're not going to allow that fear to divide us from each other. And so there are some reliable, trusted resources that I rely on. The Pew Research Center does excellent work. The Economic Policy Institute, they do a lot of fiscal analysis, and they are where I got some of the numbers on the immigrant contributions to our economy. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, at Every Texan, that's our kind of big sister national umbrella organization. The American Immigration Council, which is a function, a resource provided by big business, by many of those Fortune 500 companies contribute to the American Immigration Council because they know and they rely on, their bottom line relies on proactive, productive immigration policy. And then there's the Migration Policy Institute, which is it's a larger global think tank. They do focus on the United States, but they also have a more global perspective on migration issues. And then some other friends of ours, the Immigration Research Initiative, they are a data resource that we use, that we partner with for some of our resources. And then there's us. You are always welcome to follow Every Texan, to join us. We're actually turning 40 this year, not 35. So this year is our 40th anniversary, and coming up in October, we'll have our 40th anniversary celebration with the policy discussions, talking about healthcare, education, and what we call the people's budget. Because again, Texas, the abundance in Texas is here, it's real. It's just a matter of how we're spending it and who we are spending that abundance on. And so I invite you to join the collective. I invite you to follow us at Every Texan. And if you see something or if you have questions that you want an answer to, please reach out. We are a resource. We would love to be your resource, and would love to help find that answer. If we can't find it, we might know somebody who's able to answer it. And so I think that's it. The last thing is, like, if you want to reach out, you can scan that little code, and if you can get it. If not, I'm happy to share my contact information afterwards. So thank you, Deb.
Has agreed to share his slides with us. And if you did not have an opportunity to register and you would like Jaime's slides, I'll leave a piece of paper up here if you are downstairs, one of the two. Kitty, could you help get something downstairs where they can sign their name and put your email address, and we'll be glad to send those out. Jaime, I think there may be people in the audience. Thank you for sharing your message with us. There may be people who might have some hard questions out in the audience, and we'll open it up to some that's what I thought. I love. One thing we can always count on are good questions.
Have any other churches in Denton invited you to give your presentation?
No, ma'am, this is the first. Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Here we go.
You mentioned the workers, I think I wrote this down right, defense organization.
Workers' Defense Project.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So yes, the Workers' Defense Project is a grassroots organization. They are, I wouldn't call them a union. They're not an official union, but they are a collective of what started as day laborers, predominantly, lower income workers who were undocumented. And the organization was established to provide them some resources and protections from having their wages stolen. And so it's primarily a labor organization that people join and participate in to protect themselves from wage theft. But it also serves, because they primarily serve the immigrant community, they also do a lot of other types of immigrant justice services as well.
I just wondered how the changes in the various government reporting agencies that probably feed these statistics to y'all, how has that affected your work, or do you see it going to affect y'all?
It is, it's changing. It's changing. So right now, a lot of the reports that we're seeing, they were already done. They were already kind of like in the hopper. And so there's, thankfully, I have not seen anything that has been specifically withheld. But there are, at the beginning of the year, there were entire websites that, entire data sets that were taken down. But the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, I mentioned our big national sister organization, and other data houses, Economic Policy Institute, they have taken upon themselves to really capture some of that historical data that we've relied on and protect it. It's still determined, at the moment, we're getting the data that we want and that we're asking for. How long that happens, we'll have to see.
Having lived through two social movements, civil rights and Vietnam, and the clarity with which those were argued, it wasn't on data that they were argued. What moved the middle class, the silent majority it was called then, was clarity and finally figuring out what to do and what was the right thing to do. I don't get the clarity with the illegal immigration issue, that again is a major social issue. I don't get the clarity. I see the data, but for the life of me, I don't think that's going to move the silent majority. You need the silent majority to start moving, then one of the political parties will figure it out. But neither political party provides clarity. They provide mixed messages, uncertainty. But anyway, I think there's a clarity. What is really the end state we would like to get to? And I know it's not what we have now, and I'm part of that silent majority, sorry to say, but that's where I am. But I'm not happy with where we are now, but I don't see either political party articulating that clarity that I like to say, yeah, that makes sense. And I think I sit sort of in the middle. Most Americans would say, yeah, that's where I am too.
Thank you for saying that. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. There is a very much a lack of clarity on both sides of the policymaker spectrum, right? And so every Texan, we're nonpartisan nonprofit, so we try to stay away from partisan politics because we need both, right? We need both to make good, effective public policy. And unfortunately, it has been a bipartisan project to use immigration policy as a football, as a wedge, as a way to score points, rather than see the dignity in human beings and recognize that there are people who, so my fiance's family lives in Plano, and her dad has worked for a company for 35 years, and one of his co-workers has been on an H-1B visa for almost that amount of time. And he has tried and he has worked to change his status to become a permanent legal permanent resident. But because of the ways that his contract and his visa are organized, he is unable, unless he were to leave back and spend a certain amount of time, in a country that he hasn't been in 35 years, and then apply and come back, he's basically locked out of that process, right? And this is someone who has means, who has privilege, who has the power of his company backing him up. But unfortunately, the ways in which our system is designed does not provide him with a real option to change his status. And so one of the things that we see in a bipartisan fashion is and this is why I talked about the news and the headlines and the viral moments, right? It's like all of that flashy stuff that is put on the 5 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news, or is open up on Facebook and Twitter and wherever, that captures our emotions and our fears and that kind of gut feeling that we don't really know how to do it, and then we forget about the people who are just trying to live and trying to help us out and help themselves out and do the things in the right way. But there is no right way to do it anymore. And so when we find out, when people get desperate, we ask, well, why are they getting so desperate? It's like, well, we haven't provided them with a real option because we've been scoring political points on their backs for 35 years, for 40 years. Thank you for that question.
Have there been any state representatives or representatives within Congress that have worked with the organization before or have shown some willingness to maybe hear you out on immigration reform? It feels like sometimes when you call your congressman, they've kind of made up their minds and they seem unwilling to listen the second you say the word immigration. So,
to his credit, Senator Cornyn in the past has been a very strong supporter and recognized the importance of immigrants to Texas and to American society. And I won't speak to current situation, but in the past, as a policymaker, his office has been someone that we were able to work with and would be responsive to, at the very least, pick up the phone and listen to us. I think Senator Birdwell, who is now retiring, he was at the state level, State Senator Birdwell. He carried a lot of the legislation that increased the punitive measures targeting immigrants in recent years. But even he, was somebody who we could work with, right? Even he had his limits. In not this most recent legislative session, but in 2023, there was a bill, I believe it was SB4 in that November third special election, where Senator Birdwell actually rose and gave a speech opposing that particular bill because he said it violated his oath as a former lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, because it would have required Texas to enforce immigration law, which is a federal authority, right? Texas was trying to usurp federal authority. And Senator Birdwell, right, to his credit, as a former officer of the U.S. military, said this is a bridge too far, as they say.
Do you see any intersectionality with racism and immigration?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I think that's one of the things that it's been a long-running part of the policy in the United States. And this is why I was talking about nation building, right? And how immigration policy has been used to shape who we see ourselves as a nation, right? I talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1880s. Many, as we were getting to the West, right? Like, so, whereas a majority of the U.S. population prior, between 1860 and 1880 was on the East Coast. As we start seeing a rise in Anglo, population in the West, in California, et cetera, they are confronted with the large population of Chinese and Indian Americans and other people who were there after building railroads and mining, right? And so there's competition over who was going to control the mines, who was going to control the agriculture, who was going to control. And so, yes, there are elements of racism that have colored U.S. immigration policy in the past, but honestly, more than racism, it's about economics. It's about how and who we are bringing to do the jobs that we don't want to necessarily pay for. And one of the things that we're seeing, and race definitely, plays into that in a very important and significant way. But as you can see, right, one of the things that I like to remind people is that, in South Texas, when you go to South Texas, when you go to the border, it's more often that you will see a U.S. Border Patrol agent who is of Mexican-American descent, and sometimes even, a firstborn U.S. citizen, right, whose parents are formerly undocumented, or someone is undocumented in their family, right, serving as a U.S. Border Patrol agent. Why? Because that is the best job that they can get, and that is going to bring their family out of or at least to the next economic status level, right? And so, when we think about U.S. immigration policy and whether or not and the ways in which it operates in a somewhat discriminatory fashion, we can't, yes, race is involved, but we also have to recognize that it's about the economics as well.
It seems to me that the business community has more at stake here as a collective than most individuals. Do you think that offers some hope for opening up immigration and backing off on the ridiculous border policy?
One would hope. Yes and no. Because I think, to a certain extent, business is always going to do what is best for the bottom line. And in moments of crisis, what's often best for the bottom line is not what's best for someone else's dignity. And so at the current moment, some of our major partners are businesses. The North Texas Commission, and they're extremely supportive of, you know, immigrant justice, right? And thinking about like ways in which we can work and build proactive immigration policy precisely because, you know, makes good economic sense. It's a good deal. Unfortunately, as we've seen in the last, more and more in the last several months, in the last 8 months, we've seen a self-policing of thought, a self-policing of what could or could not be considered oppositional. And the bigger the voice, the more readily that voice is attempted to be silenced. And so it really, you know, again, it's not in the business's bottom line interest to speak up in some ways. And so what we've seen, in my experience, they're extremely, extremely supportive and are critical partners of ours. But unfortunately, we can't rely on them to use the power of their voice because they, you know, like the CEO answers to a board of directors. And the board of directors very often, you know, answers to shareholders and et cetera. And so it's not as easy as a, you know, hi, I'm Jaime Puente from Every Texan. I get to speak my voice leading with values and driven by data. They have other options, other things that they have to do.
Does your group do individual, like, do you do any legal work, or is it just policy? And
Yeah,
is
no.
it individual, or is it just as a whole?
So we are a research and policy advocacy organization, and so we don't do individual services or grassroots work, unfortunately. But we happy to put you in contact with some of our partners who do.
So how do we know who the advocates and the policy people here in Denton? Do you know who they are? I'm not sure I do.
So the ACLU has an office in Dallas mostly, and you know that's a good question. I'll have to find out really and find out who some of our partners are. I usually focus on at least in terms of immigration policy, the American Business Immigration Council. I think they're based out of Fort Worth actually. But Juan Carlos Cerda, he's an excellent resource. He's here in North Texas, and he would love to be a resource for you.
So off of Bell and Sherman, there's a place called Open Doors, and they actually help advocacy and legal support.
Thank you.
We also have an Opening Doors here in Denton. Yeah, and they are very helpful. I help a few people to go through them, and they legalize the immigration situation. So you said, Jaime, that through you we can probably, or you can help us to find out lawyers if we needed to help another people. Or is that right? Or
yeah, I can put you in. If you need resources, I can help find and navigate resources.
okay.
No? Okay. Any other questions? Jaime, I have one for you.
Yes, ma'am.
So as we see the, hopefully no more special sessions, because we're all exhausted, but as we move into the next year, what do you see on the horizon in terms of our legislators in terms of any, I know there were quite a few immigration bills this past session that did not pass, some bad bills that did not pass. What do you see going into the next year that for people who want to be advocates, who want to write letters to the editor, who want to go to Austin, hopefully not in the rain, what do you see coming up?
One of the things that I see coming up, and this is something that is, I think it's going to be very important just generally as Texans, is the focus on education, right? So one of the things that we're already seeing is, I mentioned earlier, 1 in 3 Texas kids lives in a mixed status household. Well, with the current policing regime that we're seeing, we're starting to hear, and we have to wait until the data, till the data comes out, but we're starting to hear that kids are not going to school. And that's going to be a major, major issue. Because what do we do with millions of kids who are not in school and not getting educated? What do we do with that? And in a very crass and selfish way, what are our schools going to do when they're losing that funding, right? Because we fund schools per student per day of attendance, and so when you have 1 in 3 almost Texas kids keeping themselves out of school, that's going to be a major hit to school districts across the state. Very often, the ones who are already suffering from a lack of resources. And so, one of the things that we're going to see, and that I would focus on, is what is this? What are these policies doing, and how are they affecting us? I didn't mention this in the slide, but in the last 15 years, right, since our current governor has been in office, Texas has spent $16 billion on border security. Right? We could have given every single teacher in the state of Texas a raise with that money, right? We could have made our teacher retirement system whole for the next 30 years. We could have done a lot of things with that $16 billion that we've spent on, tearing up the river in Eagle Pass, right? But we've chosen that. And so one of the things I would say is, as we see these, look, where are your resources going? And is that where you want them to go?
Are those the kinds of, I'm curious, are those the kinds of things that, for the silent majority, in talking about the impact to our school systems, funding for, I'm just curious, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I don't mind the spot.
Oh, good.
I think those are sort of tangential. I think there's a bunch of boogeymen that we raise up on either side of the spectrum for the political reason of fundraising, right? Mm-hmm. It all comes back to follow the money, in my mind. But the clarity I look for is the real simple questions that I saw guide my parents out of their positions, guiding me out of my positions on the LBGT. I mean, I evolved greatly. I mean, I look at where I've evolved. It wasn't dated. It was a clear and concise statements. And here on immigration, what do we do about the border? Is it open or not? How many people are illegal in the country? What do we do with them? My thought is maybe there's a special card, but let's do something. I don't think it's what we're doing now, rounding them up. I want to get rid of the bad people. I think normal policing will do that. But all those people, I'm not for moving them. I don't think most middle Americans are. But I don't see either political side clearly saying, let's give everyone here illegally a card and a pathway to citizenship, and this is what it's going to cost us. This is how we're going to pay for it. Business Business will find a way to make money regardless. I'm not worried about business not doing well. But anyway, that's where I am in clarity. Just give me a clear vision, and I think you would move. I think if we had a John F. Kennedy, let's put a man on the moon type of leader, an LBJ with the Great Society, the American, I don't know, I just think that's the clarity I think we need out of this. Martin Luther King provided that. We did a whole lot of tangential things in civil rights, but Martin Luther King articulated it and put his life on the line. And I think in the Vietnam War, people put their lives on the line to protest it. And so.
Very helpful. Thank you. So Jamie, can you do that for us? Can you?
I'll get right on top of that.
I called you Jamie, it's Jaime.
No worries.
Can you do that for us?
I'll get right on top of that. I think one thing that I'll say, and I really appreciate that those thoughts, because I think, and it reminds me that one of the ways that we articulate, like folks in my position, we try to articulate a proactive migration justice perspective is by focusing on, the benefits to all of us, the economic benefits, how do we, these people, and to try and respond to the taking narrative, right? And say that, well, they don't take, right? They actually contribute, and I think we get lost in the effort to justify someone's existence in a monetary and a physical, and I think if something that I'm hearing you say is we need to just get down to brass tacks. Right, and I really hope that that's a message that we can carry forward together. I really like that, and I really appreciate that.
Any other questions before we call it an evening? As you. Oh, wait. For the people particularly online.
Yeah, sorry, I just can't help myself. I'm not a silent majority, I'm not particularly silent, but I just wanted to wrap by saying that if you look at the history of the movements that have been mentioned this evening, every time we've made progress, it's because there were several fronts in that battle, and one of them were people getting into the nitty-gritty and explaining it in the ways that people with power can understand. And so I just want to say that on that front, I appreciate your service.
Thank you.
All right. So.
Thank you so much.
So Jaime, thank you so much for being here and sharing the evening with us and braving I-35 from Austin. As usual, the Q&A to me is always the most favorite part, and I appreciate all of you being interactive. Thank you to the people who have joined online. And Jaime, we just wish you all good things as you continue your work with every Texan.
Thank you so much.
And thank them for giving you the time and the space to come here.
We very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Great. One quick thing on your way down, we have our friends from League of Women Voters who have a table down there who may have some information of importance and that you might find interesting, and constitutional amendments being one of them. And also, if you would like Jaime's slides and you didn't register, please put your name and email address legibly, and I'll be sure and get those out to you.